Bearing the injured alluring Fox-Vixen, she questioned my lingering desire to hold her close. Wounded beneath the autumn stars. The forest smelled of rain and dying leaves when Kale River Wind heard the cry. Soft, pained, almost swallowed by the wind threading through the pines. He'd been returning from the mountain village with his satchel of medicinal herbs when instinct pulled him off the path toward the ancient shrine half reclaimed by moss and time. There, crumpled against the stone foundation, lay a woman unlike any he'd encountered. Her hair fell like spilled moonlight, and from beneath her torn cloak emerged a magnificent silver tail, matted with blood. Fox Spirit. The legends walked breathing and wounded before him. Her amber eyes snapped open as he approached, wild with fear and defiance. "Don't," she gasped, trying to rise and failing. "I won't be captured again." "I'm not a hunter," Kale said quietly, kneeling at a respectful distance. He could see the cruel marks of iron traps on her leg, the kind designed specifically for her kind. "I'm a healer. Please, let me help." She studied him with an intensity that seemed to pierce through pretense, searching for deception. Finding none, she gave the smallest nod, though suspicion remained carved in every line of her face. Kale moved carefully, removing his cloak to wrap around her trembling shoulders. When he lifted her, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back, she stiffened, then gradually relaxed against his chest. She weighed less than he expected, fragile despite the power humming beneath her skin. "My cottage isn't far," he murmured, adjusting his hold as her head came to rest against his shoulder. "You'll be safe there." "Why?" The question emerged barely audible. "My kind brings nothing but trouble to yours." Kale didn't have an answer that made sense, only the strange certainty blooming in his chest, that holding her felt like finally understanding a language he'd been born speaking. "Maybe some trouble is worth it," he replied softly, and carried her into the deepening night, her silver tail trailing like captured starlight between them. The silence that speaks between healing hands. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through Kale's small windows, illuminating the stranger now resting on his bed. Myra Sylvain, she'd whispered her name during a fevered moment, lay still beneath wool blankets, her silver tail draped across the quilts like living silk. Kale prepared his healing supplies with practiced efficiency, yarrow for the bleeding, comfrey paste for the deeper wounds, clean linen for binding. When he approached, her eyes opened immediately, tracking his every movement with animal wariness. "I need to treat the iron burns," he said gently, sitting beside the bed. "It will hurt." She nodded once, jaw tightening. As he peeled back the makeshift bandages, she didn't flinch, though he saw her fingers grip the sheets. The wounds were worse than he'd hoped, black veins spreading from where the trap's teeth had pierced flesh. His hands moved with careful reverence, cleaning each injury while murmuring soft apologies when she couldn't quite suppress her gasps. What surprised him was how aware he became of every detail, the way her breathing steadied when he spoke, the warmth of her skin beneath his fingertips, the unconscious way her tail curled toward him as if seeking comfort. "Why do you live alone?" she asked suddenly, her voice stronger now. "People find me odd," Kale admitted, applying salve with gentle circular motions. "Too quiet. Too content with plants and silence." "I understand that." Something shifted in her expression, recognition, perhaps kinship. "My people say I ask too many questions about the human world. That curiosity will doom me." Their eyes met, and Kale's hands stilled against her leg. "Maybe we're both too curious for our own good." 3 days passed in a rhythm of healing and hesitant conversation. Myra watched him prepare meals, grind herbs, tend his small garden. He learned she loved honey in her tea, that she hummed old foxfolk songs when she thought he wasn't listening, that her laughter, rare and startling, sounded like wind chimes. On the 4th evening, as he changed her bandages by firelight, his fingers lingered perhaps a moment too long against the now healing skin of her ankle. She noticed. Her tail, which had begun moving freely again, wrapped gently around his wrist, not restraining, but questioning. "Kale," she whispered. "Your hands shake when you touch me now." He swallowed hard, meeting her gaze. "I know." The question she fears to ask. The cottage felt smaller somehow, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Myra could walk now, though she moved carefully, testing her weight. Kale had offered her his bed while he slept by the fire, but she'd caught him watching her with an expression that made her chest tighten, longing mixed with something deeper, more patient. Foxfolk learned early that humans desired them for their beauty, their mystery, their magic. But humans never stayed. The desire always faded into fear or possessiveness, and her people always fled before their hearts could shatter. Yet Kale seemed different. He didn't stare at her tail as a trophy. He didn't ask her to demonstrate her magic. He simply existed beside her, as if her presence was answer enough. One evening, as autumn rain drummed against the roof, Myra found him preparing dinner, root vegetables and herbs simmering in a clay pot. She approached silently, her bare feet making no sound, and stood close enough that her shoulder nearly touched his arm. "You find reasons to stay near me," she said quietly. "You check wounds that have already healed. Your gaze follows me across the room." She turned to face him fully, her heart hammering. "Why do you keep finding reasons to touch me, Kale Riverwind?" He set down the wooden spoon, his hands gripping the table's edge. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Myra prepared herself for the inevitable denial, the claim of mere kindness. Instead, he turned to her, and the raw honesty in his grey eyes stole her breath. "Because every time I think about you leaving, something inside me goes quiet and cold," he said, voice rough. "Because holding you that first night felt like I'd been walking through fog my entire life and finally found solid ground." He reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and brushed a strand of silver hair from her face. "Because I'm not curious about foxfolk magic or legends. I'm curious about you, what makes you laugh, what you dream about, whether you might ever want to stay." His thumb traced her cheekbone with unbearable gentleness, choosing to stay when freedom calls. Myra's breath caught at his confession, her heart a wild thing throwing itself against her ribs. She should flee, every instinct inherited from generations of her kind screamed warnings. Humans spoke pretty words, but foxfolk who believed them always returned to the forests heartbroken, their trust shattered like creek ice under careless feet. Yet standing in the warm glow of Kale's cottage, his hands still cradling her face with such careful reverence, she couldn't summon the will to run. "My grandmother warned me," she whispered, her own hand rising to cover his. "She said humans love like spring storms, fierce and beautiful, but they always pass. They grow tired of what they cannot fully understand." "And what do you believe?" Kale asked, not defending himself, simply listening with that maddening patience. Myra closed her eyes, feeling the calluses on his palm, the steady warmth of his presence. "I believe I'm terrified," she admitted. "Because you look at me like I'm not a creature to be captured or a story to be told. You look at me like I'm simply Myra. And I've never been just myself to anyone outside my own kind." She opened her eyes to find his gaze unwavering, full of a devotion that made her want to weep and laugh simultaneously. "I don't want your magic or your mystery," Kale said softly, his other hand coming to rest at her waist, drawing her closer with infinite gentleness. "I want your mornings and your midnights. I want to know how you take your tea and what stories make you smile. I want," his voice roughened, "I want to be the one you choose to stay with, not because you're healing, but because staying feels like home." The space between them dissolved. Myra leaned forward, resting her forehead against his, their breathing mingling in the small distance that remained. Her tail wrapped around his leg, anchoring them together. "What if I disappoint you?" she breathed. "What if the reality of me is less than whatever dream you've built?" Kale's laugh was soft, almost sad. "Myra, you've been snoring in your sleep, stealing extra honey from the jar when you think I'm not looking, and leaving silver fur all over my blankets. I already know the reality of you." His hands tightened, pulling her fully against him. "And I choose this. I choose you. Every imperfect, beautiful piece." Something cracked open inside her chest, the careful armor she'd maintained for decades. Her fingers curled into his shirt, and she tilted her face up, their lips meeting in a kiss that tasted of rain, herbs, and promises neither had dared voice until now. When they finally broke apart, Myra pressed her face into the curve of his neck, feeling his pulse race against her cheek. "I'll stay," she whispered against his skin. "Not because I'm healed. Because leaving you feels like leaving part of myself behind." His arms tightened around her, and she felt his smile against her hair. Outside, The rain continued its gentle percussion, but inside the cottage, two solitary souls had finally found their constellation. Beneath the same sky, finally unafraid. Autumn deepened into winter, and the cottage that had housed one lonely herbalist now hummed with shared life. Myra stayed, not as a guest, not as a patient, but as a partner in the quiet rhythms of mountain existence. She taught Cale the foxfolk's moonlit dances, their movements a language older than words. Under silver light, she would take his hands and guide him through steps that spoke of wind through pines, of seasons turning, of love that roots deep. He proved a clumsy but devoted student, and her laughter at his missteps became his favorite sound in all the world. He showed her what it meant to have a home not defined by survival but by choice. Together they tended his herb garden, her knowledge of wild growing things complementing his cultivated wisdom. She learned to bake bread while he learned to braid silver flowers into her hair. They developed their own rituals, morning tea shared in comfortable silence, evening stories by the fire, nights when they lay tangled together beneath wool blankets, her tail draped across them both like a living promise. "Tell me again why you carried me that night," Myra murmured one evening, her head resting on Cale's chest as firelight painted shadows on the walls. His fingers traced lazy patterns along her spine. "Because the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. Like finding a word I'd been trying to remember my entire life." She tilted her face up, kissing the underside of his jaw. "My people have a saying, the fox who forgets to run has found what's worth staying for." "And have you?" he asked, though his smile suggested he knew the answer. "Every single day," she whispered, then kissed him properly, slow and deep, a conversation conducted in breath and touch. His hands mapped the curve of her waist, the small of her back, holding her close with a tenderness that still made her chest ache with its sincerity. When spring arrived, bringing traders and travelers past their mountain path, some stared at the herbalist who lived with a fox spirit. But Cale and Myra barely noticed, too absorbed in building their life, a garden expanding, a cottage filled with laughter, and two hearts that had finally stopped running. One warm evening, as apple blossoms drifted through the air, Myra took Cale's face between her hands. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For teaching me that being cherished isn't the same as being captured. That staying doesn't mean losing myself, it means finally becoming whole." He pulled her close, and they swayed together beneath the emerging stars, two solitary souls who'd found their belonging not in legends or expectations, but in each other. Lessons whispered by the wind. True love asks not for possession but for presence, honoring freedom even within devotion's embrace. The heart knows no borders between species or stories. It recognizes home in authenticity, not perfection. Staying requires greater courage than fleeing, for vulnerability is the doorway through which real intimacy enters. To be cherished means being seen completely and chosen wholly, scars and silver fur and all.